The Christmas lights twinkle behind my back, a blur of festive reds and greens that feel a million miles away. Everyone's lined up for the annual family photo. My parents, Sylvie and Martin, stand in the center, polished and perfect. My sister Blythe and her husband Drake are posed to one side, looking like they just stepped out of a magazine. Even my younger brother Cole has managed to tuck his shirt in. Cousins and their new partners have all been squeezed into the frame, a happy, cohesive unit under the glow of the grandly decorated tree. I'm holding the pumpkin pie I baked, the one I spent all morning on, its warmth seeping through the oven mitts into my palms. I'm standing awkwardly by the kitchen island, waiting for anyone to call me over. A smile is fixed on my face, a ready-to-join-in smile that's starting to feel like a mask made of cement. No one does. The photographer my mother hired fusses with his lens. "Okay, big smiles everyone," he calls out. My father places a proprietary hand on my mother's shoulder. Blythe tilts her head just so, the angle she uses for her most liked Instagram posts. A flash goes off, immortalizing the moment. The moment without me. I can feel the eyes of a few distant relatives on me, a mixture of pity and discomfort, before they quickly look away. I just stand there, holding the pie, a satellite stuck in a useless orbit. My mother finally turns to me, her lips pulled into that familiar, tight-lipped smile. It's the one she uses when she's trying to hide how deeply and utterly disgusted she is with me. "We only want immediate family in this one, Delaney," she says, her voice as crisp and cold as the December air outside. I nod. Of course. I swallow the hot, acidic burn rising in my throat. I force my own smile to remain, even as I feel it crack at the edges. Immediate family. I look at Drake, Blythe's husband of 2 years, beaming in the photo. I look at my cousin's girlfriend of 6 months, tucked happily under his arm. The definition of immediate seems flexible, shrinking just enough to exclude me. But 6 months later, they see my face again. Not in their carefully curated family photo. On the cover of Forbes. They laughed when I moved into a tiny shoebox apartment in a rundown neighborhood. They mocked me when I worked double shifts as a waitress, the smell of grease clinging to my hair. My dad, in a moment of alcohol-fueled honesty, once told me I was a disappointment in heels. Now I own the real estate company that just bought out his entire commercial block. They just don't know it yet. They think I'm still the family failure, the cautionary tale they whisper about at dinner parties. They think I'm still that girl, standing alone in the kitchen, holding a pie no one wants. The best part? The beautiful, delicious twist? They think I'm still struggling, but I've already bought the luxury resort they're heading to next week to celebrate their 35th wedding anniversary. Their sacred ground, their symbol of status and success. It's mine now. They excluded me from the family photo on Christmas because they thought I was a failure. 6 months later, I became the CEO of a company that owns the resort they're celebrating in, and they're about to find out when my Forbes cover is handed to them at check-in. The air in my parents' upstate house was thick with the scent of pine needles and simmering resentment. Christmas Day was always a performance, and my role was precast, the slightly embarrassing, underachieving middle child. I had driven 2 hours to get here, a journey fueled by a sense of familial obligation so old and ingrained, I could no longer tell if it was my own. I brought a homemade pumpkin pie, its edges crimped with painstaking care, and a bottle of red wine that cost $12. I saw it sitting on the counter, looking orphaned next to the rows of vintage champagne Drake had brought. The house itself was a testament to my parents' obsession with appearances. Every surface gleamed. Ornaments on the 20-foot tree were arranged by color and size. It wasn't a home, it was a stage set for a life of flawless success. My sister Blythe glided through the rooms, her silk dress shimmering, documenting every perfect moment for her online followers. Family goals, blessed, she'd probably caption it. Her husband Drake stood by the fireplace, swirling a brandy snifter, making loud, smug pronouncements about the stock market. My brother Cole trailed in their wake, laughing too loudly at Drake's jokes, a faithful puppy to the alpha pair. I tried to make conversation, but my questions about their lives were met with brief, dismissive answers before the topic invariably shifted back to Blythe's latest brand deal or Drake's new car. I felt less like a person and more like a piece of furniture they had to awkwardly maneuver around. My mother, Sylvie, would watch me with narrowed eyes, her expression a constant silent critique of my dress, my job, my very existence. She hadn't asked a single genuine question about my life in years. Why would she? The narrative was already written. Blythe was the success, Cole was the charming youngest, and I was the failure. Then came the moment for the family photo. It was an annual ritual, a sacred tradition. The professional photographer, a man who probably cost more per hour than I made in a week, began arranging everyone in front of the massive stone fireplace. Martin, Sylvie, right in the middle, he directed. Blythe and Drake slotted in perfectly. Cole was nudged into place. Aunts, uncles, cousins, and their significant others were layered in. I stood back, holding my pie, a familiar knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. I waited for the call, for my mother's perfunctory, "Delaney, get in here." It never came. The photographer raised his camera. I saw my Uncle Nate, my mother's brother, and the only person who ever showed me any real kindness, glance at me with a pained expression before my mother shot him a look that made him turn away. That look was a weapon, one she'd honed over decades, and just like that, he was silenced. The flash was blinding. When my vision cleared, they were all smiling, a perfect, happy family frozen in time. A family I was adjacent to, but not a part of. My mother then turned to me, her face a mask of polite condescension. "We only want immediate family in this one, Delaney." The words, though whispered, echoed in the cavernous room. The lie of them was so blatant, so cruel, it almost made me laugh. I just nodded, the motion feeling stiff and robotic. I set the pie down on the kitchen island, my appetite gone. I needed to leave. I couldn't breathe the cloying air of their perfection for one more second. I slipped out the back door, my cheap coat feeling thin against the biting wind. No one noticed. As I walked past the living room window, a ghost in my own family's story, I heard Blythe's high, musical laugh. "Honestly," she was saying to Drake, her voice dripping with derision, "she's like the unpaid intern of the family. Shows up with a pie, hoping for a pat on the head." Drake's rumbling chuckle followed. The sound was like gravel grinding in my ears. That was it. That was the line. The unpaid intern of the family. The 2-hour drive back to my tiny apartment was a blur of tears and highway lights. Each set of headlights coming toward me felt like an interrogation. The red taillights ahead of me bled into long, blurry streaks. I cried until my throat was raw and my head ached. It wasn't the photo itself. It was the lifetime of dismissals, the constant unspoken judgment, the casual cruelty that it represented. It was the final, undeniable proof that I would never, ever be enough for them. They didn't just disapprove of my life choices, they were ashamed of me. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. The tears slowed, replaced by a cold, hard resolve that settled deep in my bones. The humiliation burned, but underneath it, something else was catching fire. A vow. I whispered it into the dark, empty car, the words tasting like salt and freedom. Something will change. I will make it change. They wanted a perfect family photo? Fine. I would build a life so spectacular, it would make their posed, perfect little world look like a cheap postcard. I would not be their footnote. I would be the whole story. The silence of my apartment was a welcome relief after the forced cheer of my parents' house. It was a shoebox, yes, but it was my shoebox. The peeling paint on the windowsill, the single radiator that hissed and clanked, the view of a graffiti-covered brick wall. It was all mine. It was the physical manifestation of my escape from their world of pristine, hollow perfection. But tonight, it also felt like a cage. The weight of my failure, so explicitly confirmed by my family, pressed down on me from the low ceiling. I sank onto my lumpy mattress, the events of the day replaying in my mind. The photo, my mother's icy words, Blythe's mocking laughter, the unpaid intern of the family. The shame was a physical thing, a sour taste in my mouth, For a long while, I just lay there, staring at the water stains on the ceiling, letting the despair wash over me. But the vow I made in the car was still there, a tiny resilient ember glowing in the darkness. Crying on the highway had been a release. Crying in my apartment felt like a surrender. I refused to surrender. I sat up, wiping the last of the tears from my face with the back of my hand. Okay, Delaney. Change. How? I grabbed my old, slow laptop from the floor, the one my parents had bought me for college and which they probably assumed I'd hawked for cash by now. The fan whirred loudly as it booted up. I opened my banking app, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs. The screen loaded, and the number stared back at me, stark and unforgiving. $26.42. That was it. That was the sum total of my worldly wealth. The net worth of the family disappointment. A wave of panic tried to pull me under. This wasn't just a low point. This was the bottom. My next paycheck from the diner was 5 days away. This had to last. But my vow wasn't about lasting. It was about changing. I spent the next hour doing what I always did when I felt lost. I searched for a way out. I scrolled through freelance websites, my eyes scanning for writing gigs, data entry, virtual assistant jobs, anything. The listings were a sea of competition. Must have 5+ years experience. Expert level in Adobe Suite required. Seeking candidates with a proven track record of success. My resume, with its single line about waitressing at the Greasy Spoon Diner, felt pathetic. Every click was a dead end. A quiet rejection that piled onto the mountain of louder ones from earlier in the day. My hope began to curdle back into despair. Maybe they were right. Maybe this was all I was capable of. I was about to close the laptop and give in to the misery when a small, flashy banner ad at the bottom of the page caught my eye. It was for an online course. Unlock Your Fortune, Introduction to Real Estate Investment, it proclaimed in bold, optimistic letters. Below it, a picture of a smiling couple standing in front of a beautiful house with a sold sign. It looked cheesy, like a late-night infomercial. My first instinct was to dismiss it as a scam. But something made me pause. Real estate. My father was a developer, building luxury homes for the wealthy. My sister's husband Drake dabbled in commercial properties, a fact he never missed an opportunity to mention. Their world was built on property, on land, on assets. It was a language of power I'd never been taught to speak. I clicked the ad. The landing page was slick, full of testimonials and promises of financial freedom, and at the bottom, the price. $19.99. My breath caught in my throat. $20. It was almost everything I had. It was food for the next few days. It was the bus fare to get to and from work. Spending it on a whim, on a cheesy online course that was probably worthless, was reckless. It was stupid. It was irresponsible. The sensible thing to do was to close the tab, turn off the computer, and try to sleep. I stared at the Buy Now button. My mother's tight smile flashed in my mind. Blythe's laugh echoed in my ears. The unpaid intern. The disappointment. $26.42. This tiny sum was my reality, the one they had so gleefully confirmed for me. Clinging to it wouldn't change anything. It would just prolong the slow, grinding failure they expected from me. Risking it, however, felt like an act of rebellion. It was a bet, not on the course, but on myself, a $20 bet that I was more than they thought I was. My hand trembled as I moved the cursor. I thought about the drive home, the cold resolve that had replaced my tears. Something will change. This was the first step. This was a choice. My choice. I clicked the button. I entered my debit card information, my fingers flying across the keys before I could second-guess myself. The confirmation page loaded. Welcome, Delaney. Your journey to financial freedom starts now. It was corny, but seeing my name attached to those words sent a jolt through me. For the first time all day, I felt a flicker of something other than shame. I felt a tiny, fragile spark of agency. I had 6.43 left to my name, but I had also just made my first investment. The decision to buy the course was like striking a match in a dark room. It was a small light, but it was enough to see the path forward. I knew that a $20 course alone wasn't going to change my life. I had to change my life. That single click was a declaration of intent, and now I had to follow through. The next morning, I woke up with a purpose that had been missing for years. The despair from Christmas night was still there, a dull ache in the background, but it was no longer the main event. It was fuel. My first act of commitment was to my tools. My old laptop was a liability. It crashed twice while I was trying to watch the first module of the real estate course. It was slow, unreliable, a constant reminder of my hand-me-down status. I needed something better, something that could keep up with the ambition that was now roaring to life inside me. But with $6 to my name, buying a new one was impossible. So I had to make a sacrifice. I gathered up the few things I owned of any value, a necklace from my grandmother, a few textbooks from a college course I'd dropped out of, and the laptop itself. I took them to a pawn shop, a dingy place that smelled of dust and desperation. The man behind the counter barely looked at me, his eyes scanning my items with a practiced indifference. He offered me $150 for the lot. It was a robbery, but I was in no position to bargain. I took the cash, the crumpled bills feeling like a fortune in my hand. It was a painful transaction. The necklace was the last piece of my grandmother I had. But I told myself she would have wanted me to build a future, not cling to the past. This was about burning the safety net. There was no going back. With the pawn shop money and my next 2 paychecks from the diner, I bought a refurbished, business-grade laptop. It was functional, fast, and utterly charmless. It was perfect. It became my command center. My life fell into a grueling, relentless rhythm. From 5 p.m. to 1 a.m., I was a waitress. I'd come home, the smell of fried onions and stale coffee clinging to my clothes, and open the laptop. From 2 a.m. until I collapsed from exhaustion around dawn, I was a student. I devoured the real estate course. I watched every video, took every quiz, and filled notebooks with frantic, messy handwriting. I learned about wholesaling, flipping, zoning laws, and escrow. The terms were a foreign language at first, but I attacked them with the ferocity of a starving person at a feast. The diner became a blur of faces and orders. My social life, already minimal, evaporated completely. My apartment was no longer a home. It was a place to sleep for a few hours and study. The circles under my eyes grew darker. I lived on instant noodles, and the sheer stubborn refusal to fail. After I finished the introductory course, I knew I needed more. I started consuming every piece of free content I could find. That's when I stumbled upon a podcast called The Maris Method. The host, Ruben Maris, was a self-made real estate mogul, a legend in the industry. His voice was gravelly, no nonsense. He didn't sell dreams, he outlined blueprints. He spoke about market analysis, risk mitigation, and leveraging capital with a clarity that cut through all the noise. He didn't sugarcoat the difficulty. He talked about his own early failures, the deals that fell through, the money he lost, but he always framed them as lessons, as tuition paid to the school of hard knocks. I became obsessed. I listened to his entire back catalog of episodes during my bus rides to the diner, his voice a constant presence in my ears. One night, after a particularly brutal shift where a customer had made me cry in the walk-in freezer over a cold side of fries, I came home feeling lower than ever. I was exhausted, broke, and the mountain ahead seemed impossibly high. I listened to a new episode of Ruben's podcast. He ended it with a familiar sign-off, but this time, it hit me differently. The only thing stopping you, he said, is the story you keep telling yourself. Change the story, change the outcome. A spark of something wild and audacious lit up inside me. It was a crazy idea, born of desperation and lack of sleep. I opened a new email. I typed Ruben Maris's name into the tour field, guessing at the address based on his company's website. I wrote the subject line, "A story you haven't heard." My fingers flew across the keyboard. I didn't beg or plead. I didn't talk about my family or the Christmas photo. I laid it out with the same kind of brutal honesty he used in his podcast. I told him my situation: waitress, tiny apartment, a burning desire to get into real estate. I told him I'd taken a course, that I was studying non-stop. I told him I had no money, no connections, and no safety net. All I had was a willingness to outwork anyone. I ended the email with a single line. I'm not asking for a handout. I'm asking for a blueprint. I believe I can provide a return on that investment. I read it over once, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was insane. He was a titan of industry. He would never even see this email. His assistant would delete it in a second. But the alternative was to do nothing, to keep grinding away in the dark, alone. I took a deep breath and hit send. I expected nothing. Days passed. I continued my routine: work, study, sleep, repeat. The email felt like a foolish dream. Then, a week later, an email notification popped up on my phone. The sender was simply RM. My hands shook as I opened it. The message was only 6 words long. Call me if you're serious. Underneath was a phone number. My first thought was that it was a prank, a cruel joke. It couldn't be real. But the email address matched the corporate domain. I stared at the number on my screen for a full hour, my stomach churning with a terrifying mix of hope and fear. This was the moment of truth. The story I kept telling myself. Was I the unpaid intern, the family failure? Or was I the person who emailed Ruben Maris and got a reply? I walked to the quietest corner of my apartment, took a deep, shuddering breath, and dialed the number. The phone rang twice. A gravelly, familiar voice answered, sharp and impatient. Maris. My own voice came out as a squeak. Mr. Maris, this is Delaney Knox. I sent you an email. There was a pause. I could hear papers shuffling on his end. I was sure he was about to hang up, to tell me he had no idea what I was talking about. The waitress, he said. Not as a question, but as a statement of fact. You've got 5 minutes. Convince me you're not wasting my time. And so, I talked. I didn't know where the words came from. All the studying, the late nights, the desperation, it all poured out. I didn't talk about my feelings. I talked about what I'd learned. I quoted market analysis from his podcast back to him. I spoke about a specific rundown commercial block I'd been researching in my neighborhood, and my theory on why it was undervalued. I was logical, concise, and I didn't complain once. I was trying to speak his language. When I finally ran out of breath, the line was silent. For a terrifying 10 seconds, I thought he'd hung up. Then, I heard a low grunt. All right, Knox, you've got my attention. We met the next day at a small, unassuming coffee shop far from the glitzy towers of downtown. Ruben Maris, in person, was exactly like his podcast persona, compact, intense, with eyes that seemed to see right through you. He was older than I'd imagined, maybe in his late 60s, with a face etched with the lines of 100 deals won and lost. He wasn't wearing a fancy suit, just a simple polo shirt and jeans. He ordered a black coffee and watched me over the rim of the cup as I nervously sipped my water. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. I get a dozen emails like yours a week, he started, his voice a low rumble. Kids who want to be rich. They watch a video, get excited, and think this business is a lottery ticket. It's not. It's a war. It's fought in spreadsheets and zoning board meetings and pre-dawn phone calls. It will chew you up and spit you out if you're not prepared. He leaned forward, his gaze pinning me to my seat. So, here are my terms. This isn't charity. This is an investment. I'm investing my time, which is more valuable than money. In return, I expect a return. I see a flicker of something in you. Hunger, desperation. It's a powerful combination. But talent without discipline is worthless. So you will listen, you will learn, and you will work. Don't waste my time, and more importantly, don't waste your talent. I just nodded, unable to speak. My mentorship began immediately. It wasn't glamorous. He didn't hand me a briefcase full of cash and send me off to buy a skyscraper. He made me work. He offered me a job on his team, but it was the lowest possible rung on the ladder. Administrative assistant. My pay was barely more than I made at the diner, but I quit my waitressing job without a second thought. My days were spent making coffee, scheduling his appointments, filing paperwork, and answering phones. To an outsider, it would have looked like a step down. My family, had they known, would have seen it as yet another menial job, proof of my inability to amount to anything. But I knew what it really was. It was an education. It was a front row seat to the real estate empire he had built. When I wasn't doing admin tasks, I was his shadow. He'd say, "Knox, get in the car," and we'd spend hours driving through neglected neighborhoods. He'd point to a dilapidated warehouse or a boarded-up storefront and grill me. "What do you see?" he'd ask. At first, I'd see decay. He taught me to see potential. He taught me to look at zoning maps, at city development plans, at traffic patterns. He taught me to see the invisible structures that determined a property's true value. He was a brutal teacher. He never praised me. The closest thing to a compliment I ever got was a grunt of acknowledgement when I correctly identified a zoning issue or a potential structural problem. He would tear apart my analysis, pointing out flaws in my logic with ruthless precision. "Your feelings don't matter," he'd say. "The numbers do. The facts do." It was exhausting, humbling, and the most exhilarating experience of my life. I was learning the language of my family's world, the language of power. I was no longer the unpaid intern. I was an apprentice, being forged in the fire of Reuben's expectations, and every day I felt myself getting stronger, harder, and more determined than ever. After 6 months of shadowing Reuben and handling the grunt work in his office, I had managed to scrape together a small amount of savings. It was just over $2,000, a pathetic sum in the world of real estate, but to me it felt like a war chest. I was restless. The theories and case studies were no longer enough. I needed to get in the game. I needed to make a move. The memory of my family's disdain was a constant spur, urging me forward. I wasn't just learning for myself, I was building an arsenal. I spent weeks of my nights and weekends scouring off-market listings, looking for something, anything that fit my microscopic budget. Finally, I found it. A small, single-family home on the frayed edge of a gentrifying neighborhood. It was in foreclosure, owned by a bank that just wanted it off their books. The pictures showed peeling paint, an overgrown yard, and a sagging porch. But my research told a different story. The city was planning to build a new park just 3 blocks away. A popular coffee chain had just signed a lease down the street. The bones were good. It was undervalued. I brought the lead to Reuben, my hands shaking as I laid the file on his desk. He scanned the documents, his face an unreadable mask. He didn't say it was a good idea. He didn't say it was a bad one. He just looked at me and asked, "What's your plan?" I had one. I had spent a week developing it. I would use my savings as a deposit to get the property under contract, a practice known as wholesaling. Then I would find a cash buyer, a real investor to purchase the contract from me for a small fee. My profit would be minimal, maybe a few $1,000s, but it would be a start. It would be my first win. Reuben nodded slowly. "It's a plan," he said, which was his version of a blessing. The next few days were a blur of adrenaline. I negotiated with the bank's asset manager, using the scripts and techniques I had learned from watching Reuben. To my astonishment, they accepted my lowball offer. I had the house under contract. For a moment, I was euphoric. I had done it. I was a player. Now came the hard part, finding a buyer before my 30-day closing window expired. I worked my network, which consisted mostly of the low-level contractors and agents, whose numbers I had collected while working for Reuben. I made dozens of calls. I sent emails. I got a few nibbles of interest, but no firm commitments. The clock was ticking. The initial euphoria gave way to a gnawing anxiety. Finally, with only a week to spare, I found a buyer. He was a small-time flipper who saw the same potential I did. We agreed on a price. My fee would be $5,000. $5,000. It felt like $1 million. The closing was set. I could almost taste the victory. I allowed myself to dream, just for a second, of what I would do with that money. Reinvest it, find a bigger deal, start climbing the ladder. Then, 3 days before we were supposed to close, I got the call. It was the flipper. His voice was apologetic. "Sorry, Delaney. My funding fell through. I have to back out." The phone felt slick in my hand. "What? What do you mean?" I stammered, my mind refusing to process the words. But it was true. His private lender had gotten spooked by a dip in the market and pulled his financing. The deal was dead, and with it, my deposit. My entire savings gone. I walked out of the office in a daze. I don't remember the bus ride home. The next thing I knew, I was standing in the alley behind the diner where I used to work. I had come back to a place of familiar misery. The smell of grease and stale beer from the dumpster filled the air. My legs gave out and I slid down the gritty brick wall, burying my face in my hands. The tears came, hot and furious. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the hope. I had failed. I had proven my family right. I was a joke, an amateur who got in over her head, the unpaid intern trying to play in the big leagues. I cried until I was empty, until all that was left was a hollow, aching exhaustion. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Ruben. I ignored it. It buzzed again, and again. Finally, I answered. My voice thick and broken. "Hello? Where are you?" he demanded. No preamble. "It doesn't matter," I choked out. "The deal is gone. The money is gone. I failed." "I know," he said, his voice flat. "The flipper called me, looking for a loan. I turned him down. Now answer my question. Where are you?" I told him. He was there in 10 minutes. He didn't offer a hug or a kind word. He stood over me, his arms crossed, his expression stern. I must have looked pathetic, huddled against a dumpster, my face streaked with tears and dirt. "Get up," he said. It wasn't a request. I slowly, shakily got to my feet. "You want to cry? Fine. You get 5 minutes to feel sorry for yourself," he said, looking at his watch. "Then you're done. This business doesn't care about your tears. The market doesn't care that your feelings are hurt. You made a mistake. Your plan was weak. You relied on one buyer whose financing wasn't secure. That's on you. You didn't do your due diligence." His words were like slaps to the face. They were brutal, and they were true. "So now you have a choice," he continued, his voice unrelenting. "You can stay here in this alley and cry about the $2,000 you lost. Or you can get back to the office, figure out what you did wrong, fix your damn plan, and make sure it never happens again. Your call." He turned and walked back to his car without waiting for an answer. I watched him go, the anger and hurt warring with the undeniable truth of his words. He was right. Crying in an alley changed nothing. Failure wasn't a destination, it was a data point. My first flip was a failure, but it was also my first real lesson. I wiped my eyes on my sleeve, took a deep breath that smelled of garbage, and started walking back toward the office. The sun was setting, but for me, the day was just beginning. I had a plan to fix. That first failure became my foundation. It burned away my naivety and left behind a core of hardened steel. I didn't just fix my plan, I rebuilt my entire approach from the ground up. I spent the next year in a self-imposed exile from anything that wasn't work. It was a silent, relentless period of grinding that no one saw and no one applauded. My life was a montage of unglamorous effort. My days started before sunrise, analyzing foreclosure listings and auction schedules until my eyes burned. My work at Ruben's office continued, but I was no longer just an admin. He saw the shift in me. He started giving me small research projects, testing my analysis, pushing my understanding of risk. I took on every task he threw at me, no matter how menial, and I delivered. I created a database of private lenders, vets them, and built relationships. I would never be caught with a single point of failure again. My nights were spent at my small desk in my apartment, cross-referencing property records with city development plans, looking for the patterns no one else was seeing. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. My diet consisted of coffee and whatever was cheapest at the corner store. I lost weight. The shadows under my eyes became permanent fixtures. I was a ghost haunting the edges of the real estate world, invisible but always watching, always learning. About 8 months into this silent year, I closed my first real deal. It was a duplex, even smaller and uglier than the first property I'd lost. But this time, my plan was airtight. I had 2 vetted cash buyers lined up before I even put in the offer. The closing went through without a hitch. My profit was $7,000. I remember sitting in my car after the closing, holding the check in my hands. It wasn't a life-changing amount of money, but it was proof. It was real. I didn't cry or celebrate. I just folded the check, put it in my pocket, and drove back to the office to find the next deal. I reinvested every single penny. The $7,000 became the seed money for a partnership on a small commercial property. That profit, in turn, was rolled into a multi-unit residential building. I was living on fumes, still wearing the same 2 pairs of work pants, still eating instant noodles, but my company, a simple LLC I named Apex Holdings, was growing. Eventually, I had enough to move out of my apartment and into a tiny windowless office space in a cheap building. It was little more than a closet, but it was mine. Having a door I could close, a space dedicated solely to my work, felt like the height of luxury. My world shrank to the size of that room, the city maps on the walls my only decoration. During this entire year, my communication with my family dwindled to almost nothing. My mother would call occasionally, her voice tight with disapproval. The conversations were always the same. She'd ask, in a tone that implied she already knew the answer, "Are you still working at that little office job?" I'd say yes, because it was easier than explaining what I was really doing. I never offered any details, and she never asked for them. Her calls were just a prelude to a lengthy monologue about Blythe's latest triumphs. Blythe was thriving, at least on the surface. Her Instagram feed was a curated stream of perfection. She announced her 3rd major brand deal with a luxury skincare line. A few months later, there was a lavish, professionally photographed gender reveal party. It was a boy. The posts were flooded with congratulatory comments. "You have the perfect life," one user wrote. I would look at the photos, Blythe in a flowing dress, Drake with his hand on her stomach, both of them beaming, and feel a strange hollow detachment. It was like watching a movie about people I used to know. Their world of brand deals and baby showers felt utterly alien to my world of spreadsheets and pre-dawn analysis. They thought I was still a waitress, or something close to it. They had their story about me, and in their self-absorbed lives, they saw no reason to look for a different one. And I was more than happy to let them believe it. My silence was my shield, and my secret weapon. The less they knew, the better. I was in my small, cramped office one afternoon, staring at a zoning map of the city's industrial district, when a news alert popped up on my screen. It was from a local business journal. The headline made my blood run cold, then hot. Knox Development Group faces significant setbacks on waterfront project. Knox Development Group. My father's company. I clicked the link, my heart pounding a strange, predatory rhythm. The article laid it out in stark detail. A major supplier for their luxury condo project had gone bankrupt, halting construction indefinitely. They were facing massive financial penalties for the delays. They had over-leveraged on the project, betting everything on its success, and now the whole enterprise was teetering on the brink of collapse. The journalist quoted an anonymous source from within the company who described my father, Martin Knox, as panicked and desperate. I leaned back in my chair, the words blurring on the screen. A part of me, a dark and vicious part I hadn't realized was so strong, felt a surge of pure, unadulterated glee. This was karma. This was justice. For every dismissive glance, for every condescending remark, for every time he had looked at me with disappointment in his eyes, this was the payback. And I could make it so much worse for him. Apex Holdings was no longer a dream funded by noodle dinners. It was a real, capitalized company. I had access to private lenders. I had capital. I spent the next hour running scenarios, my mind racing with possibilities. I could quietly buy out the debt of the bankrupt supplier. I could become his primary creditor. I could swoop in and purchase the parcel of land next to his stalled project, the one he needed for Phase 2, and hold it hostage. I could make him come to me. I could make him beg. The image was so vivid, so satisfying. I imagined him walking into my shabby little office, his tailored suit looking out of place, his face pale and tight with humiliation as he realized that the daughter he had written off was the one holding his entire future in her hands. The thought was intoxicating. Revenge was a dish best served cold, and I had been freezing it for a year. I was so lost in this fantasy of retribution that I almost didn't hear my phone buzz. It was Ruben. I had texted him the link to the article without comment. Now he was calling. "I saw it," he said, his voice as calm as ever. "I can hear your brain spinning from across town. What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking he's vulnerable," I said, my voice tight. "I'm thinking there's an opportunity." "An opportunity for what?" Ruben pressed. "To stick a knife in his back? To prove a point? To get some petty revenge for whatever slights he's dealt you over the years?" His words were a splash of cold water. "It's not petty," I retorted, a defensive heat rising in my cheeks. "It's business. He made a bad bet. I'm in a position to capitalize on it." "Don't lie to me, and don't lie to yourself, Knox," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "This isn't about business for you. It's personal. And letting personal grudges drive your business decisions is the fastest way to ruin a good enterprise. You'll overpay. You'll take unnecessary risks. You'll be blinded by emotion." I was silent, staring at the map on my wall. He was right, of course. "Let me give you some advice," he continued. "Real revenge isn't about tearing someone else down. It's about building yourself up so high that they become insignificant. Don't waste your wins trying to spite small people. Your victory isn't making your father fail. Your victory is making his success or failure irrelevant to you. Focus forward. There are bigger deals out there, better opportunities that don't come with all this emotional baggage. Don't get distracted by the past." I looked at the article again, at the picture of my father looking stressed and older than I'd ever seen him. The fire of my anger was still there, but Ruben's words had banked the flames. He was right. A move against my father would feel good for a day, maybe a week, but it was a small, bitter prize. My ambition was bigger than that. My goals were bigger than him. Tearing down his legacy wasn't the point. The point was to build my own, on my own terms, so solid and so vast that his world couldn't even cast a shadow on it. "Okay," I said quietly into the phone. "Okay, Ruben. I hear you." I closed the article. I pulled up the file on a portfolio of undervalued commercial properties on the other side of the state. I would resist the temptation. For now, the future held better, more elegant forms of victory. The phone rang late one Tuesday night, jolting me from a deep dive into municipal bond reports. The caller ID read, "Uncle Nate, my mother's younger brother." He was the only one in the family who had ever shown me a shred of genuine warmth, though it was always tinged with a sad, apologetic weakness. He never stood up for me, but he would sometimes slip me a $20 bill at family gatherings with a conspiratorial wink, as if to say, "I know this is all nonsense." I hadn't spoken to him in months. I answered, "Uncle Nate? Is everything okay?" His voice was thick, the words slurring together around the distinct clinking of ice in a glass. He was drunk. "Delaney, Laney, is that you?" he slurred, using a childhood nickname no one else remembered. "It's me, Nate. What's wrong?" "Oh, nothing's wrong. Everything's just perfect," he said, his voice dripping with a bitter sarcasm that was unusual for him. "Your mother and father are just perfect. Blythe is perfect. The whole damn family is perfect." He let out a short, harsh laugh that sounded more like a sob. A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. "Nate, what happened?" "We had dinner tonight," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The lawyers were there, the fancy ones with the shiny shoes. They're redoing the will, Lanny. Redoing the whole thing now that Blythe's got a little prince on the way." I stayed silent, my hand gripping the edge of my desk. I already knew where this was going. "They're cutting you out," he whispered, the words heavy with guilt. "Completely. Not a dime." I tried to say something. I really did. I said, "What about Delaney? And your mother?" She got that look on her face. "You know the one? Cold as a frozen fish," she said. "She said you're not in a stable place in your life, that you're unreliable." Martin just sat there, nodding like a bobblehead. Unstable. That's the word they used. He waited for my reaction, for tears, for anger, for a breakdown. But none came. A strange and profound calm washed over me. The news landed not like a blow, but like a final, expected piece of a puzzle clicking into place. Unstable, unreliable. They were still telling themselves the same old story, building their perfect family narrative on the foundation of my supposed failure. The girl with the cheap wine and the diner job. The girl who needed to be cut out, like a blemish on a photograph. "Lanny, are you there?" Uncle Nate asked, his voice laced with concern. "I'm here, Nate," I said, my own voice sounding surprisingly steady, even to me. "It's okay. Thank you for telling me." "It's not okay," he insisted, his voice rising with drunken indignation. "It's wrong. But I'm a coward, Lanny. Always have been. I thought you should know." "I appreciate it," I said again, and I meant it. His small, cowardly act of rebellion was more than anyone else had ever offered me. We hung up a few minutes later. I sat in the silence of my office, the city lights twinkling outside my window. They were writing me out of their future, severing the last formal tie, and I felt nothing. No, that wasn't true. I felt a sense of liberation. They had finally released me. Their opinion, their money, their legacy, it was all irrelevant. Because as Uncle Nate was whispering his drunken, guilty secrets into the phone, my eyes were on a stack of documents sitting on the corner of my desk. The cover page was stamped with the logo of a prestigious law firm, one with lawyers whose shoes were far shinier than my father's. It was the final purchase agreement. 2 weeks earlier, acting on a tip from one of Ruben's contacts, I had made the biggest move of my career, a luxury resort and spa. A favorite getaway for the East Coast elite had been quietly put up for sale by its aging owner. Its name was the Blackwood Resort and Spa. My parents' favorite place on earth. The place they went for every anniversary. The place they held up as the pinnacle of success and luxury. My company, Apex Holdings, using a carefully constructed shell corporation to mask our identity, had spent the last 10 days in aggressive negotiations. My father thought I was unstable. He was fighting over scraps from his crumbling condo project. Meanwhile, I was orchestrating a multi-million-dollar acquisition of the very symbol of his status. The irony was so thick, so potent, it was almost comical. While they were busy erasing my name from their will, I was signing the papers that made me their landlord. I picked up a pen, the one Ruben had given me when I closed my first profitable deal. Its weight felt solid, real. I flipped to the last page of the agreement, and with a steady hand, signed my name on the line that read, Purchaser, Delaney Knox, Owner. The trap was officially set. All I had to do now was wait for the mice to walk into it. The ink on the Blackwood Resort contract was barely dry when the real work began. This wasn't about revenge anymore, not entirely. It was about strategy, precision, and the quiet, elegant execution of a flawless plan. My company, Apex Holdings, was the legal owner, but to the world, the resort now belonged to a new anonymous entity called Echelon Properties. The name was deliberately bland and corporate, designed to attract no attention. My first order of business was to handle the existing management. I flew to the resort, not as the new owner, but as a consultant for Echelon. I spent 2 days observing the staff, the operations, the culture. The general manager was competent but complacent, a relic of the previous owner's era. He wasn't the right fit for what I had planned. I needed someone sharp, discreet, and loyal to me, not to the resort's history. I found her in Marina Leary. She was the head of guest services, a woman in her late 30s with a calm, commanding presence and eyes that missed nothing. She handled a crisis with an entitled guest with such unflappable professionalism that I knew instantly she was the one. I invited her to dinner at an off-site restaurant. Echelon Properties has just acquired the Blackwood, I told her directly, cutting through any pretense. And I'm not a consultant. My name is Delaney Knox, and I'm the owner. I'm offering you the position of general manager, effective immediately. Marina's composure was impressive. A flicker of surprise crossed her face, but it was quickly replaced by a cool, appraising look. She didn't ask how someone so young had acquired a property like the Blackwood. She just asked, "What's your vision for the resort?" We talked for 2 hours. I laid out my plans for modernization, for elevating the guest experience, for making the Blackwood the undisputed #1 luxury destination in the country. She listened intently, asking sharp, insightful questions. By the end of the dinner, she accepted the position. My final instruction to her was the most important. "I need absolute discretion, Marina," I said, my voice low and serious. "My family, the Knox family, are frequent guests here. They are not to know about my involvement, under any circumstances. To you, to the staff, to everyone. The owner is the anonymous Echelon Properties. I am to be referred to only as the owner. We have never met. Is that understood?" "Perfectly," she replied, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. She understood this wasn't just business, it was a performance, and she had just been cast in a starring role. The trap was baited. Now, I just had to wait. It didn't take long. A week later, my mother made the announcement on her social media, just as I knew she would. She posted a professionally taken photo of her and my father from a previous trip to the resort, both of them tanned and smiling. The caption read, "Cannot wait to be back at our happy place, the gorgeous Blackwood Resort, to celebrate 35 years of marriage next week. Some things just get better with age." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Their marriage, from what I'd seen up close, was a brittle, transactional affair. But for their audience, it was a grand romance. I read the comments from their friends and Blythe's followers. "Congratulations. Relationship goals. You deserve to be spoiled." I felt a cold, clean anger. They were celebrating their perfect life in my resort. The pieces were falling into place more perfectly than I could have imagined. The final piece of the puzzle was the most delicate. I had been in talks with Forbes for a few weeks. A young, sharp journalist named Candace Wu had gotten wind of Apex Holdings' aggressive, under-the-radar acquisitions. She was intrigued by the story of a new, mysterious player in the market. I had agreed to an exclusive interview, but only on my terms. The story would run in their upcoming Titans of Tomorrow issue. I called Candace. "I have a proposition for you," I said. "The story is yours, but I need the issue to be printed a week early. A very small, private run, and I need a few copies delivered to a specific location on a specific date." I could hear the curiosity in her voice. "That's a highly unusual request, Miss Knox." "It's a highly unusual story," I replied. "You're a journalist, Candace. You appreciate a good reveal. Trust me, this will be the best one you've ever been a part of." There was a pause, and then she laughed. "All right, Miss Knox, you've got my interest. Send me the details." I arranged everything through Marina. A welcome basket would be sent to my parents' suite upon their arrival. Tucked inside, amongst the champagne and artisanal chocolates, would be a small, elegantly wrapped gift. The gift tag would read, "A welcome gift from the management. We hope you enjoy the latest issue of Forbes." The Knox family anniversary weekend had arrived. Drake had insisted on booking the resort's most exclusive private dining room, the founder's cellar, for a celebratory dinner. It was a space carved out of the bedrock beneath the main lodge, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling wine racks holding priceless vintages. It was a room designed to scream wealth and exclusivity. It was the perfect stage. I arrived not with them but after them. I didn't need an invitation. I owned the door. I had spent more time than I cared to admit choosing my outfit. I settled on a simple, sleeveless black dress. It was elegant, understated, and expensive in a way that was apparent only to those who knew what to look for. It was the opposite of Blythe's flashy, logo-driven style. It was quiet power. My hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail. My only jewelry was a simple, classic watch. I looked, I hoped, like someone who belonged. I paused outside the heavy oak door of the cellar, listening to the muffled sounds of their laughter from within. I could picture the scene perfectly. My father holding court, my mother smiling her brittle smile, Blythe taking selfies, and Drake loudly boasting about some recent victory. The family, performing its perfection for an audience of 4. I took a breath, smoothed down my dress, and pushed the door open. I walked in. The laughter cut off instantly. The air crackled with sudden, shocked silence. 4 pairs of eyes swiveled to face me. They looked at me as if I were an apparition, a ghost who had wandered into the wrong haunting. My father was the first to recover, his face hardening into a mask of cold fury. "Delaney, what are you doing here? This is a private event." My mother's lips thinned into that familiar line of disapproval. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering for a moment on my dress, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. This wasn't the uniform of a waitress. Blythe, ever the mean girl, recovered with a sneer. She set her phone down on the table, her voice dripping with condescending pity. "Oh, Delaney, are you lost? This isn't the staff entrance." She looked at Drake, who let out a low, appreciative chuckle. "Honestly," she added, rolling her eyes, "still crashing parties after all these years? It's kind of sad." I didn't say a word. I just stood there, letting their insults hang in the air. I let them show me exactly who they were. One last time. I met each of their gazes. My expression calm, neutral. I was no longer the girl who would flinch or look away. The silence stretched. It was becoming awkward. My father opened his mouth to, I assume, order me out. But before he could speak, the cellar door opened again. This time, it was Marina Leary. She was the picture of professional grace, her posture perfect, her expression serene. She stepped into the room, her presence immediately commanding attention. She gave me a brief, almost imperceptible nod. "Excuse me, Mr. and Mrs. Knox," she said, her voice smooth and clear as a bell. "I am so sorry to interrupt your celebration." My mother visibly preened, assuming this was some special attention due to their status as longtime guests. "Not at all," she said graciously. Marina's eyes swept over the table before landing back on my parents. "I just wanted to let you know," she continued, her voice echoing slightly in the stone-walled room, "that our resort's owner has arrived." There was a beat of confused silence. My father frowned. "The owner? I thought old Mr. Blackwood passed away." "He did," Marina said smoothly. "The resort is under new ownership." She then turned her body slightly, and with a simple, elegant movement, she gestured directly at me. I watched their faces as they tried to process the gesture. The confusion, the disbelief. It was as if she had told them the sky was green. Blythe let out a small, disbelieving laugh. "Her? You've got to be kidding." But Marina's face was a mask of polite, professional certainty. The word hung in the air between us, a bomb waiting to detonate. "Owner." The moment stretched, thick with disbelief. My family stared, caught between Marina's professional declaration and a lifetime of their own deeply held assumptions about me. My father's face was a thundercloud of confusion and anger. My mother looked as if she had swallowed something sour. Drake's smug expression had faltered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. Only Blythe seemed to find it amusing, a smirk playing on her lips as if this were all some elaborate pathetic joke on my part. And then, as if on cue, the performance continued to its next act. The cellar door swung open a third time. A woman I recognized instantly walked in, carrying a slim leather portfolio. It was Candace Wu, the Forbes journalist. She was cool, composed, and radiated an aura of unimpeachable authority. She surveyed the tense scene with the practiced eye of a reporter who had walked into 1,000 dramatic moments. She smiled a tight, professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mr. and Mrs. Knox? Candace Wu from Forbes magazine," she said, her voice cutting through the strained silence. "My apologies for the intrusion. I was just meeting with the new owner for a follow-up and wanted to drop something off." She glanced at me. "I hope the owner doesn't mind a little publicity," she said, the words a clear, pre-rehearsed line. I gave a slight nod. "I think I can live with it." Candace walked to the heavy oak table. With a deliberate, almost theatrical slowness, she opened her portfolio and pulled out 4 pristine, glossy copies of a magazine. She placed them on the table, one in front of my father, one in front of my mother, and 2 in the center. For a moment, no one moved. They all stared at the magazines as if they were venomous snakes. Then slowly, my father reached out a hand and drew one closer. My face stared up at him from the cover. It was a powerful shot. I was seated in a leather chair in my sparse but stylish office, looking directly into the camera. I was wearing a tailored navy blue power suit. My expression was not smiling. It was serious, confident, unyielding, and above my head, in the bold, iconic Forbes font, was the headline: The Quiet CEO. How Delaney Knox Built a Real Estate Empire Under the Radar. And below that, in a slightly smaller font, Inside Apex Holdings' latest blockbuster acquisition, the Blackwood Resort. Silence, a profound, echoing silence that was louder than any shouting could ever be. I watched as my father's eyes traced the letters of my name. I watched as Blythe leaned over his shoulder, her own perfectly made-up face paling as she read the subheadline. I watched my mother's hand fly to her throat, her knuckles white. My father's hand was trembling slightly as he opened the magazine. Candace had, as instructed, opened it to the feature spread. There were more pictures. Me on a construction site, me in a boardroom with Reuben, and a full-page stunning aerial shot of the Blackwood Resort, the place where they were currently sitting, with a caption detailing its recent purchase by Apex Holdings for an 8-figure sum. The article detailed my journey, my strategy of acquiring undervalued properties, my company's rapid silent growth. It even estimated my net worth in a sidebar. The number had more zeros than I think my father had ever seen attached to my name. The room was frozen. The air was thick with the death of a narrative, the complete and utter annihilation of the story they had told themselves about me for my entire life. The unpaid intern, the disappointment, the unstable failure. It all evaporated in the glossy, undeniable reality of the magazine sitting on their dinner table. I didn't have to say a word. The story spoke for itself. The first sound to break the spell was the sharp, crystalline shatter of glass. My mother, Sylvie, had been reaching for her wine, and her hand, shaking uncontrollably, knocked the delicate stemware to the stone floor. Red wine bled across the pale gray slate like a mortal wound. She didn't even seem to notice. Her eyes, wide with a horror that was almost comical, were fixed on my face, the face on the magazine cover. My father, Martin, went a color I had never seen on him before. It was a ghastly pale gray, as if all the blood had drained from his head. He stared at the magazine, his mouth slightly agape. The arrogant, dismissive patriarch was gone, replaced by a stunned, speechless old man. He looked from the magazine to me and back again, his mind clearly unable to bridge the chasm between the daughter he thought he knew and the woman on the cover of Forbes. It was Blythe who finally found her voice, though it was thin and reedy, stripped of its usual confident cadence. She pointed a trembling, perfectly manicured finger at me. You own this place?" she stammered, the words catching in her throat. "This whole resort?" I met her gaze. The mean girl, the golden child, looked small and utterly bewildered. All the years of her casual cruelty, her snide remarks, her pitying looks, it all culminated in this moment of sputtering incomprehension. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I gave her the simplest, most powerful answer I could. I nodded once. "Bought it last month," I said, my voice even and calm. "The deal closed on the 7th. The specificity was a small, cruel twist of the knife. I knew she'd remember that the 7th was the day she had posted a condescending throwback photo of me from my awkward teenage years. From the corner of my eye, I saw something that gave me a jolt of pure, unexpected satisfaction. Uncle Nate, who had been silent and miserable this whole time, had a slow, wide smile spreading across his face. It was the first genuine, happy expression I had seen from him in years. He looked at me and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of his own, his eyes shining with a mixture of pride and vicarious triumph. Marina, ever the professional, stepped forward. "Miss Knox is indeed the new proprietor of the Blackwood," she confirmed, her voice leaving no room for doubt. She looked at my parents, then at Blythe and Drake. "She's our new boss." The word boss landed with the force of a physical blow. Drake, who had been silent until now, finally reacted. His arrogant smirk was long gone, replaced by a naked, calculating look. The gears were turning in his head, reassessing, recalibrating. He looked at me not as his wife's pathetic sister, but as a power player, a source of capital, a potential contact. The shift was nauseatingly transparent. My brother, Cole, just looked lost. He kept glancing from me to my parents to the magazine, his face a mask of pure confusion. "But you work at a diner," he said, the words coming out sounding childish and stupid. It was the last piece of the old narrative, the final, dying echo of their collective delusion. "I did a lot of things you don't know about." The statement was simple, but it contained the weight of 1,000 lonely nights, 1,000 sacrifices, 1,000 small, unseen victories. They hadn't known, because they had never bothered to ask. They had never bothered to see me at all. The initial shockwave had passed, leaving a tense, awkward silence in its wake. The family that prided itself on its perfect image was completely shattered, the pieces scattered across the floor of my wine cellar. What came next was a clumsy, pathetic attempt to glue them back together. Cole, ever the simple one, was the first to move. He pushed his chair back and came toward me, his arms outstretched for a hug. "Delaney, wow, this is amazing," he said, his face beaming with a sudden opportunistic pride. It was a clumsy, boyish gesture, a desperate attempt to realign himself with the new center of power in the room. I didn't move back, but I didn't embrace him either. I just stood there, letting his arms fall awkwardly at his sides. The hug he was offering wasn't for me. It was for the woman on the cover of Forbes. Drake, on the other hand, chose a different tactic, sneering denial. He leaned back in his chair, forcing a contemptuous smirk onto his face. "So you got lucky with some deal," he said, trying to regain his footing. "Don't act like you're some kind of genius. Real estate is a bubble, it'll pop." It was a weak, transparent attempt to diminish my success, to shrink it down to a size his ego could handle. It was pathetic. Then came Blythe. She approached me cautiously, her face a carefully constructed mask of remorse. "Delaney," she began, her voice soft and placating. I had no idea. We've been so worried about you." The lie was so audacious, it was almost impressive. "We should talk, really talk. Catch up." She was already rewriting history, trying to position herself as the caring, concerned sister. She wasn't apologizing for her cruelty. She was inviting the new, successful me back into her life. I looked at her, then at Cole's hopeful face, at Drake's sneer, at my father's stunned silence and my mother's horrified stare. For a single fleeting moment, the old pain flared up. The little girl inside me, who had desperately wanted their approval, their love, their acceptance. For years, this was the moment I had dreamed of, the moment they would finally see me, finally recognize my worth. But looking at their faces now, I realized a profound and liberating truth. I didn't want it anymore. Their approval was worthless. It was a currency that had no value in the economy of my new life. Their love was conditional, transactional, and I had no interest in their terms. I looked directly at Blythe, my voice quiet but firm, carrying across the silent room. "I used to want your love," I said, the words simple and true. "I used to want all of your love, but I've learned that some things aren't worth wanting." I let my gaze drift to my parents. "Now I just want peace." With that, I turned to Marina. "Please send the bill for their dinner to my office," I said. Then I turned back to my family one last time. "Enjoy the resort." And then I left. I didn't storm out. I didn't wait for a reaction. My point had been made. The story had been told. There was nothing left to say. I walked out of the cellar, up the stone steps, and into the cool night air, leaving them behind in the ruins of their own making. I walked away from the family dinner, leaving them to sit in my restaurant, in my resort, with my face staring up at them from the cover of a magazine. I didn't need to see the fallout. I didn't need to hear the arguments, the accusations, the frantic recalibrations. My victory wasn't in their defeat. It was in my departure. It was in my freedom. This Christmas was different. There was no 2-hour drive fueled by obligation. There was no cheap wine, no pie baked in a desperate plea for acceptance. There was just the quiet hum of my own home. I had bought it a month ago. A modern minimalist house with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over a silent, snow-covered forest. It was the kind of house my father built for other people, but this one was mine. I had bought it with my own money, for my own peace. A fire crackled in the wide stone fireplace, its warmth pushing back the December chill. I sat on a plush sofa, a glass of expensive single malt scotch, a gift from Reuben in my hand. I was alone, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't lonely. The silence wasn't empty. It was full. It was the sound of contentment, of a life built on my own terms. It was the sound of peace. My phone buzzed on the table beside me. The screen lit up with a familiar name. Reuben Maris. I smiled and answered. "Merry Christmas, Knox," he said, his voice the same gravelly rumble it always was. "Merry Christmas, Reuben," I replied, taking a sip of the scotch. It was smooth and smoky. There was a pause, and I could practically hear him smiling on the other end of the line. "I saw the article," he said. "Forbes, not bad." Coming from Reuben, not bad was the highest form of praise, the equivalent of a poetic tribute. It was a validation that mattered more to me than any fawning apology from my family could. He wasn't impressed by the money or the fame. He was acknowledging the work, the grind, the silent year. He had seen the entire journey, from the girl crying in the alley to the woman on the cover. "I had a good teacher," I said. "And I meant it." "The teacher just points the way," he countered. "The student has to walk the path. You walked it." We spoke for a few more minutes, not about business, but about the future, about the holidays. It was a conversation between equals, between colleagues, a bond forged not by blood or obligation, but by mutual respect and shared ambition. After we hung up, I let the silence settle around me again. My gaze drifted to the wall above the fireplace. I hadn't decorated for Christmas. There was no tree, no tinsel, no festive lights. There was just one thing hanging on the wall, in a simple, elegant black frame. It was my own copy of the Forbes magazine. I looked at the face staring back at me, the woman in the power suit, the quiet CEO. This was my family photo now. It wasn't a picture of a group of people pretending to be happy, a carefully curated image of perfection. It was a picture of a single person's truth. It was a testament to resilience, a portrait of a woman who had been left out in the cold and had decided to build her own damn house, light her own damn fire. I thought about last Christmas, about standing in my mother's kitchen holding that pie, feeling so small and insignificant, waiting for an invitation that would never come. I thought about the girl who cried on the highway, vowing that something would change, and I smiled, a real genuine smile that reached my eyes. "This year," I whispered to the quiet room, "I took my own photo." My victory over my family was never the end point. It was a catalyst. The satisfaction of that reveal at the resort was real, but it was also fleeting. It closed a chapter, a painful one, but my story was far from over. True power, as Reuben had taught me, isn't about settling scores. It's about building something that lasts, something that makes the world better, even in a small way. A few months after the Forbes issue came out, I started a foundation. I called it the Apex Initiative. Its mission was simple: to provide seed funding and mentorship to young women from underprivileged backgrounds who wanted to get into business, especially real estate. I wanted to give them the one thing I never had, a hand up at the very beginning. I wanted to be their Reuben. The work is challenging, but it's the most fulfilling thing I've ever done. I meet with young, hungry entrepreneurs, girls who remind me so much of myself just a few years ago. I see that same fire in their eyes, that same desperation to prove themselves, to build a life on their own terms. I don't just give them money, I give them the blueprint. I teach them how to analyze a deal, how to negotiate, how to be disciplined when their emotions are screaming at them to be reckless. I teach them that failure is not the end, but a crucial part of the curriculum. My family tried to reach out, of course. After the resort incident, there was a flood of awkward texts and voicemails, apologies that sounded more like business proposals, invitations to brunch that were really just attempts to get access to my influence and my capital. I ignored them all. Not out of anger, but out of a profound sense of peace. Their world, with its petty dramas and conditional love, simply had no place in mine anymore. They excluded me to keep their family photo perfect. That's what it all came down to. They believed that perfection was about cropping out the inconvenient parts, about presenting a flawless, smiling image to the world, even if it was a lie. But I learned that perfection means nothing without truth. A perfect picture of a broken thing is still a picture of a broken thing. My life isn't perfect. It's messy and complicated and demanding. There are still lonely nights and moments of doubt. But it's true. It's mine. Every success, every failure, every brick I've laid is my own. I'm not the lost child from the Christmas photo anymore. I'm not the unpaid intern or the family disappointment. I'm the one who got lost, and in doing so, finally found herself. The biggest win wasn't buying their favorite resort. It wasn't seeing the shock on their faces. The bigger win was discovering that the only person whose approval I ever really needed was my own. Sometimes, rejection is the beginning of your rise, not your end. Have you ever been excluded or underestimated by your own family? What did you do about it? Let me know in the comments. If this story hit you deep, hit that like button and subscribe for more emotional revenge stories like this one. You're stronger than you think. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.